Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hudson Valley Flood Resilience Network's Lunch and Learn. We are really excited about today's program, working with the Bard College Center for Environmental Policy graduate students on some of their research projects. Before we get underway, just invite everyone to open up the chat box and introduce yourself, where you're zooming in from, what your role is, so we have a sense of who's with us in the Zoom room today. So we'll give everyone a few more minutes to join us, but just a couple of announcements before we get underway with today's featured presentation. My name is Emily Vale. I'm the Executive Director of the Hudson River Watershed Alliance and a co-facilitator of the Hudson Valley Flood Resilience Network here with Jess Coonan from New York Sea Grant. And we've had a really busy spring of programs here at the Flood Resilience Network. Last week, Jess and I were in Utica, New York, presenting about the Flood Resilience Network to a huge crowd of technical experts on flooding at the New York State Floodplain and Stormwater Managers Association. We gave a plenary presentation on how FRN is structured and some of the ways that we're measuring impact. And then Jess was also on a panel on regional approaches to supporting local flood resilience, where we learned a lot and got to share a lot with a lot of great feedback as well from folks from all over the state. We are also in the midst of a Land Use Leadership Alliance training in partnership with Pace Land Use Law Center. So some of you who are on the Zoom today are participating in our land use training. The students from Bard have also been participating, which has been a great tie-in as well. And so we're working with 6 municipalities who are members of the Flood Resilience Network and providing training around land use opportunities for local planning and policy that improves flood resilience. So today's program is supported by the Hudson River Estuary Program and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation with support from the New York State Water Resources Institute at Cornell. So thanks so much to our funders. And a couple of upcoming events, really just one actually, in addition to our Lula training that is continuing. That's the Land Use Leadership Alliance. So on Thursday, June 11th, we have a special Flood Resilience Network Lunch and Learn workshop. So this will be a virtual meeting like this one, but a little bit more interactive. And we're really looking forward to working with the Climate Migration Network and Devin Parfait, who's the tribal chief of a tribe in coastal Louisiana on building trust through community-led flood resilience planning. So they'll walk us through insights and perspectives of a collaborative, locally led process. We will have a really interactive workshop session on partnership values and strategies, and then have some practical insights and tools that the tribe is using and how that might apply to our work here in New York's Hudson Valley. So we're really looking forward to this, and you can register at the link that's in the chat that just shared. We also, last announcement is that there are a lot of open grants right now that will directly support local flood resilience. And so those grant deadlines are coming up in June and July. So a couple of links to new grant opportunities from the Environmental Facilities Corporation, DEC, and the Department of State. So with that, we'll transition into today's program. I wanted to mention that we have been working internally at the Flood Resilience Network on what we're calling the 4Ps framework. So this is shorthand for plans, practices, policies, and projects, and really thinking through the role of the network in helping our municipal members think through planning opportunities and then implement those plans to have great local flood adaptation actions take place. So we have been working on a handout that we'll be sharing in the coming weeks with you all that shares this framework, but it's something that we've worked with the BARD students on, and they'll be referring to it. So I wanted to give a little background on that. So as I mentioned, the Flood Resilience Network has been collaborating with the Bard College Center for Environmental Policy graduate students in the Politics of Solutions course on 2 projects that support objectives within the Flood Resilience Network strategic roadmap. So the group of environmental policy students were working with me to think about planning and this shift to implementation. And the climate science and policy students worked with Jess to think through information and data that are available to help us understand and plan for flood risk and thinking about a data hub that might be useful to FRN members. So now I'm going to hand it over to Morgan to start the presentation. Thanks everyone for joining us.
All right, let's just get this up. All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Morgan, and welcome to our project, Leveraging the 4 Ps of Local Water Governance: Planning, Policies, Practices, and Projects, Bridging Plans to Resilience. I am here today, like Emily said, with my fellow classmates from Bard's Center for Environmental Policy. All right, so to get started, a little bit about us. Like I said, we're grad students at Bard. We're studying environmental policy. And through our class, Politics of Solutions, taught by our professors Cale Roberts and Monique Segura, we are taking on the form of a consultancy, with our client being the Hudson Valley Flood Resilience Network. And with guidance from Emily Vale, we are working with the FRN to achieve the goal of supporting municipalities in the implementation process of their flood resilience plans. Our purpose here today is to share with you all what we have learned from our research and interviews with local flood plans and FRN municipalities and partners. This is going to be kind of a broad overview of our research and findings, and then we can get into more specific questions and answers at the end of our presentation. We are very excited to share what we have learned with you. So before we jump into our findings real quick, I just wanted to share a roadmap of our presentation with you so that you guys can know what to expect. We're going to be sharing a little bit of background on flooding in the Hudson Valley before we jump into the scope and methods that we used throughout our project. From there, we're going to share our findings from our interviews with FRN members and municipalities and pull out some key themes and insights that we encountered along the way. We will then present our recommendations for the FRN moving forward, and then we'll wrap up with that Q&A. So let's get started. And let's talk about the reason that we're here, flooding. The Hudson Valley is no stranger to flooding. Heavy rainfall, storm surges, and extreme high tides can and I'll keep going. They can and have caused damage to people, infrastructure, and property. And I'm sure that many of us remember the 2023 storm that dropped 8 inches of rain in Highland Falls, causing flash flooding that led to extensive damages. An increase in severe weather events means an increase in flooding and flood risks, which makes flood planning and the actual implementation of those plans so necessary. Well, there are many great tools out there for flood planning, such as Climate Action Planning Institution Adaptation, or CAPI Adapt, and the Resilience Implementation and Strategic Enhancements Assessment, the RISE assessment, and Climate Smart Communities, just to name a few. Many FRN municipalities often struggle to fully implement these plans, and this is critical to the safety of a community, which is why we set out to uncover what helps and what prevents a municipality from implementing their flood plans. And we were tasked with the FRN to assess what factors enable or block communities from implementing these plans. And so just to jump into our methods real quick, Emily already brought this up, but we did use the 4 Ps framework as grounding for this project. This represents the process in which future-oriented, resilience-based planning transitions to the implementation of practices, policies, and projects within municipalities. This framework was provided to us by the FRN and Emily and helped us a lot throughout this project. And so to begin our research, we first had to have a working understanding of the lay of the land, so to say, in terms of flood resilience across the Hudson Valley. So, in creating a landscape analysis, we started by reading and analyzing climate smart community PE7 pledges or pledge element actions and the surrounding documents within them, such as resilience plans, vulnerability assessments, and hazard mitigation plans. Furthermore, to gain a better understanding of the regional efforts, we also analyzed more region-specific or specialized resilience plans like the climate adaptation resilience plans or CARPs and those RISE assessments and CAPI adapts that I mentioned. And this really helped us establish a baseline knowledge in which we could form questions for future interviews. And to finish this regional overview, we interviewed FRN regional partners from the Cornell Cooperative Extension, the Hudson River Estuary Program, the Hudson Valley Regional Council, the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, as well as SLR Consulting. And these partners really provided us insight into successful stories throughout the Hudson River Valley and gaps that exist in the process moving from planning to implementation, giving us further direction for our municipal interviews. And in these partner interviews, we learned that while the municipalities within the Hudson Valley work tirelessly to implement their resilience plans, they're commonly doing so in kind of isolation, not necessarily sharing their successes or roadblocks with other municipalities. And we also found that it's really not uncommon for municipalities to be working with outdated plans or maps, which is usually need to be updated for implementation to begin. So, from the information that we gathered from this landscape analysis and from insight gained from the first round of interviews, our team was able to conduct targeted interviews to municipalities and their leaders. And we had the opportunity to talk to representatives from the city of Kingston, the village of Piermont, the town of Poughkeepsie, Rockland County, Westchester County, and Columbia County. And by choosing these municipalities, we were really able to capture a range of different locations across the Hudson Valley, different degrees of capacity, and different types of planning. With this information, we were then able to uncover common barriers that municipalities felt while trying to implement these plans, while also being able to highlight successful municipal implementations of flood resilience measures. And during our first interviews with some of the FRN partners, we gained valuable information from asking focused questions that informed us during our next stage of municipal interviews, which Paula is going to take us through now.
Okay, now we are going to go over our findings from these interviews. In these interviews, we ask questions such as, what is your role in supporting municipal plans and implementation of flood mitigation strategies? And when you reflect on the path from a flood study to an actual project on the ground, where do things tend to stall for the regional partners? And for members, we ask things such as, how does your municipality prioritize concerns about flooding? And how can the FRN better assist you in the places where you're stalled? All right. The findings of these interviews with the FRN partners can be categorized into three sections throughout the planning process. These steps are prior to planning, during the planning, and after the plans are completed. The FRN partners are usually involved in the creation of these plans, but not usually in the implementation of these plans. Therefore, a lot of the interviews were associated with the planning process. Here, a lot of hurdles can take place before workshopping for these plans can start. The partners we interviewed usually assist municipalities with lower capacities, and they found that community involvement can help shorten these gaps and make sure that plans are more holistic and reflective of the members in the community. This means having more outreach and more inclusion of the community and education from to the community about these plans, better assist them in the planning process. Prior to planning, during the planning process, they found that the lack of capacity tends to lead to dependence on volunteers. Municipalities have to work on informing these volunteers without overwhelming them and making sure that knowledge isn't lost if volunteers move on or managing volunteer burnout. Having resources readily available for volunteers is another important component of volunteer engagement. So the transfer of information and managing this burnout is really essential during the planning process because it can also take months and months and months. After the plans are complete, partners have found that the transition from planning to implementation is a major hurdle. The implementation of these plans are usually completed by one group and can be left on the shelf to collect dust. This can be because municipalities do not have a dedicated person for these plans, or the person that did know the intricate details of this plan has moved on. Municipalities could also not have the funding to proceed with these plans. These plans, however, can be used to get more grants for implementation, and if the municipalities have the capacity to apply for more grants and know more about the types of grants to apply to and the application process. Across all of the interviews for the municipalities, we found three key themes that emerged about municipalities are experiencing it when it comes to flood resilience planning and implementation. The first theme we found was that capacity and staffing constraints limit implementation. Many municipalities, especially the smaller or rural ones, lack the diversified and dedicated staff to carry these plans forward. Implementation can fall on a single person or a small team, and when that capacity doesn't exist, plans stall. Even when funding is available, communities frequently lack the time, expertise, administrative support to maintain grants, manage projects, or track the progress over time. The next clear theme is the gap between planning and action. While many communities have successfully completed the vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans, moving to implementation has been difficult. This planning to action gap is driven by things like planning fatigue, unclear responsibility to next steps, funding structures that support planning more than execution, and this has led to plans gathering dust on the shelf, unless they are actively leveraged for grants or tied to clear implementation roles, timelines, and updated local policies. The last theme we will talk about today is the collaboration between involved parties. Collaboration, leadership, and community buy-in are important to success. Municipalities that make progress tend to share common traits: strong leadership, dedicated coordinators or task forces, and active community engagement. Regional partners such as the Cornell Cooperative, regional planning councils, and the Flood Resilience Network help municipalities share common knowledge, build momentum, and avoid working in a silo. Public engagement also plays a key role both in building support for projects and in holding local governments accountable for implementation. Now that we have gone over some of the experiences we've had seen about planning through our interviews, we want to know what you have experienced throughout your planning processes.
So we're going to direct you all who are on the Zoom to the link that Bree just dropped in the chat to fill out a quick survey.
This is the survey you should all be seeing once you click that link. And I'll just give you a minute and then we'll go over the results. Alrighty. Wow. It's very evenly split. Okay. Well, good to know we're on the right track. Now we're just going to have to find ways to prioritize what's more important. So continuing on with the presentation, I will now hand it over to Leah to discuss case studies that are reflective of our findings throughout the interviews.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. So I'll be going over case studies. So to start, Poughkeepsie. showed us that the will to update policies do exist, although what is missing is a structured space where municipalities can work through the process together with technical experts in the room. Instead, everyone's trying to figure out this process by themselves. Um, this is not just a Poughkeepsie problem, it's a structural problem that plays out across the region, and Poughkeepsie gave us a window inside to understand it. A big part of the disconnect came down to how funding works. Grants can support the planning phase or the engineering phase, but rarely both. So communities finish one piece and then cannot afford to start the next. What helps Poughkeepsie navigate this strong communication, what helps Poughkeepsie is strong communication across departments and a willingness to ask for help. Poughkeepsie stands as a model for what a strong local capacity can look like. They have dedicated volunteer climate smart community task force that is deeply committed to work. Their municipal departments are engaged and effective, and critically, these two groups work together rather than operating in a parallel silo. This combination of civic engagement and department collaboration is not something that every municipality has, and is significant to why Poughkeepsie is able to move forward even when the structural challenges are present. Um, but one thing that they really told us is still needed is connection to other municipalities facing the same challenges. They want to know how communities in similar situations have updated their zoning codes and incorporated flood plan restrictions into their local laws. They are looking for that peer exchange, and this is exactly why they joined the FRN, specifically because they believe that this is what would be provided. Um, Secondly, our next case study is Columbia County, which showed us that even the most ambitious, well-sourced planning process leave a critical question unanswered. Once the plan is done, no one has a reliable way to know what actually got built. And Columbia County completed one of the most comprehensive planning processes that we reviewed, involving custom GIS mapping for 17 municipalities, public roundtables, vulnerable assessments, and a task force with representation for every town. It was an enormous undertaking that was completed in March of 2024. And yet, when we asked about what happens now, how does the county know what has actually been implemented on the ground? The answer was striking. There is no formal system for tracking progress. The plan exists, but there is no consistent way to see what got built, what is stalled, or what needs attention. This is not unique to Columbia County. It came up in almost every municipal interview. The problem is not that municipalities don't want to track their progress, but it is that there is no standard way to actually fit their capacity. Am I am I okay? Okay. Um, and lastly, our third case study was the village of Piermont. Um, And Piermont is a small municipality that went the extra mile, working within real constraints of limited staff and budget and a high flood exposure to build something larger than what those constraints might have suggested was possible. They implemented a neighbor-to-neighbor alert system, a low-cost grassroots contact network that allowed the village to share information rapidly with residents and businesses before and during hazard events. What Piermont showed us is that this kind of system is not just needed in emergencies, but it helps build the ongoing trust between local government and the public, which makes everything easier. When residents, businesses are informed and connected, they show up. They hold officials accountable. They support the long-term investment that resilience requires. Imagine a severe flood storm is heading your direction, but you are receiving live updates and photos of the flood from your community connecting and limiting anxiety about community's ability to respond quickly. And so, based on our reviews of the municipal flood plans and insights that we gathered from interviews from both regional and municipality members, we have identified three recommendations that the FRN could implement to continue flood resilience coordination efforts in the Hudson Valley. So, one opportunity that we identified is creating a municipality cohort within the FRN to connect communities. A mentorship model that would connect municipalities that are slightly further along in the process to share their lessons learned and strategies that they have gained with other municipalities in the FRN. For instance, some municipalities are still developing plans while others are beginning to implement them. The idea is that we have a mini network of coordination within the FRN and across the Hudson Valley, which could formalize and implement flood resilience plans faster. And this is just an example of what that would look like. Our second recommendation is that the FRN is to encourage municipalities to develop neighbor-to-neighbor communication networks. We heard through our interviews that the formal communication channels don't always reach people quickly, especially during extreme flooding and in smaller communities. One practical approach is encouraging neighbor-to-neighbor communication networks that could connect business owners, residents, municipal staff, and emergency response workers. For example, in Piermont, we saw how simple communication methods through text or WhatsApp allowed people to share real-time updates during flooding events. These systems don't require funding or infrastructure. It could be as simple as a shared contact list. The FRN encourages municipalities to develop a contact system among FRN members. And our last one is we recommend that municipalities launch an implementation tracking tool to formalize CARP and climate smart community implementations. One of the key gaps that we observed is that many municipalities have completed plans, but there is a limited structure of how these plans are actually being implemented. This toolkit would serve as a simple standard way for municipalities to document progress and track actions and identify where support is still needed. And our next slide shows our way of tracking this from our progress, which was this spreadsheet here that we have as an example of what this could look like. And it could obviously be adaptable, comparing it to other municipalities, whatever works best for each municipality. And so, yeah, so thank you so much for listening, and we really appreciate your guys' time. And if you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Thanks so much to the whole BARD environmental policy student team. Amazing work and really, I think some really concrete and tangible recommendations and next steps, some stuff that is already in the works for us at the Flood Resilience Network. So we're always happy to hear when that's aligned, but some really important nuance that I think will really help us hone our program. So if anyone has a question or two, we can take that now. And we're hoping to also have some time for more questions and discussion after the second group presents as well. So if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat, or if you want to come off of mute and ask it. Great. So we've got a question from Jessica. Will your research findings, including spreadsheets, be publicly available?
A lot of the data that we were able to utilize is publicly available on the CSC website. It's a means of being able to organize it, to be able to compare throughout municipalities too, and kind of illustrate the fact that understanding where your neighbors are at can help move you through different PE7 actions and be able to implement these things in your own communities. A lot of this data is publicly available already.
Great. And a question from Ingrid. Did any of the communities that you interviewed have a successful example of implementation tracking tools to highlight?
I can speak to an implementation tracking tool that is currently in progress over the next couple of weeks. So we're looking at a pretty quick timeline. The County of Westchester, from what we've heard in our interview, they are planning on creating a more comprehensive website that is going to include some GIS interactive tools to where community members are able to go online and find out hazards, implementation plans, and where they're at in those implementation projects.
Great, thank you. I think in the interest of time, we'll shift over to the next group. And then, like I said, we'll have a little bit more time at the end for any additional questions or discussion. So I'll hand it over to Jess to introduce the next group.
Great, thank you, and nice job to the first group. I learned a lot. So I had the pleasure of working with the climate science and policy team, and our main question was around creating a data hub for the flood resilience network. This was a need that was identified through our strategic road mapping process a few years ago. How can we better provide resources to our members via the website? And it is challenging because there are so many facets to flood resilience. There's different data you need if you're doing, trying to understand your vulnerability, trying to improve your emergency communications, where do you go for grants? And so we're just really trying to hone in on what's the best way we can serve our members when there's so many, you know, different resources scattered all over the place. And so it was great to have the students dig into this question for us. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jatin.
All right. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with the rest of the climate science and policy students today to talk about some of the work we did for the Flood Resilience Network. As just said, where we worked on finding where resource gaps were for members. But before we get started, I would like to introduce you to my wonderful group of peers that I worked on this project with. That's going to be Hadia, Nicole, Camila, Jatin, and Pem. And we all wore many hats during this project, so it's we put in a lot of work. So in 2023, the Flood Resilience Network established a strategic roadmap. The goals for years 3 and 4 were strengthening network systems and providing meaningful network programming and tools via a data work group and creating a flood resilience data hub for network members. One of the ways to meet the goal for year 3 is through the organization and addition of tools and resources available to members. In order to make this possible, it is essential for the FRN to update resources for their network members. With the understanding of this strategic roadmap, I, along with the rest of the climate science and policy students, divided the project into 2 phases to identify these gaps. So the first thing we did was review existing resources from local, state, federal, and institutional levels. And we divided this work into 2 groups. resources that aid in emergency response and those that have to do with flood resilience. When reviewing these resources, we combed through the ones, sorry. We combed through the ones that were outdated and filtered them out. And we added some additional resources we thought would help the FRN to achieve year 3 and 4 goals. Um, and we began to identify where there might be resource gaps, which leads into the second step. Um, we also talked to a wide variety of stakeholders from 17 municipalities within the member counties. And we talked to people at the county and municipal levels, volunteers on planning boards, all with an interest in making their localities more resilient toward flooding. And questions we asked had to do with local flooding in the immediate and future context, emergency response efforts to flooding, what interviewees felt they their access to data was right now and their capabilities, and what gaps they felt they had to meeting the resilience goals. And from this, we were able to identify what we think members might need in the future from the Flood Resilience Network. And my peer Jotin is going to talk now a little bit about what those findings were.
Thank you, Jules. Well, so I see a lot of the people that, some of the people that we interviewed here as well. So thank you for joining. And we're going to quickly run over what we learned from interviewing everyone. And yes, there were a lot of points raised, but we're going to cover some of the key ones. Number one, no centralized resource. There was no accessible or up-to-date resources present for data uh, sharing or like for the flood resilient resources as well. There were no tools or guidance tailored to the Hudson Valley. So these things that existed online already were either outdated or in the process of being removed or not funded enough. And this is what we saw across all counties in our interviews. Second was, again, many of the existing resources are there, but they're outdated and very scattered. They're difficult to find, and they're not designed for immediate use by municipalities. It needs a lot of processing and manpower to to bring it into fruition and implementation. And we thought this was another thing across all counties that everyone shared. And this was actually one of the most spoken things about, which was members and counties believe that municipalities have different levels of staff and time to dedicate to flood resilience, and technical capacity is still in the learning curve. Resources to use for these flood mitigation practices and the data for it is not effectively being utilized because of this capacity issue. Not everyone, and this is again something that was explored, not every county has a Jess or an Emily. I think a solution proposed to us was we should have clones of Jess and Emily in every county. So now I'll pass on to Hadia.
The good news is that FRN is critical in helping solve these issues. So we've developed 4 recommendations for the FRN to further facilitate flood resilience in the Hudson Valley, and here they are. So the first one would be to build and maintain a centralized, user-friendly data and funding hub that curates the most relevant tools, data sets, and grant opportunities for Hudson Valley communities. So resources for to plan for flood resilience and real-time response need to be accessible in terms of finding, but also utilization of them. And everyone is coming in with different backgrounds to support this cause, and we want everyone to be able to develop their understanding through this hub and contribute to the community's flood resilience with its tools. Number 2, develop role-specific resilience starter kits and updated emergency management templates so municipal staff can quickly integrate flood data into plans and protocols and document impacts consistently. Oftentimes, a lot of the staff working on these issues are volunteers, and then there's also those people that have been holding down the fort for many years, and when they leave, the newcomers have to start anew. And so to prevent that hindrance to progress, we're suggesting that we make sure everyone's ready to upkeep the responsibilities and existing knowledge through these role-specific starter kits. And these would be very different for, say, a mayor versus a highway superintendent versus a water resources engineer. But alongside emergency protocol standardization, they all serve the purpose to harmonize response and resilience building across the network. And number 3 would be to embed practical project workflows, simple screening tools, and regional case studies to help communities move from understanding flood risk to implementing on-the-ground solutions. So building adaptation starts with a vulnerability and risk assessment, but there's a lot of work that goes into prior to implementation. So screening tools can help prioritize hazards to address strategies and align them with community needs and funding sources through prioritization and planning. And we have so much to learn from nearby communities and what they've done. There are success stories, there's some strategies that might not have worked out so well, and people can share resources that they've used, and together we can build capacity for these solutions. And last but not least, our last recommendation is to compile a shared library of ordinances, zoning provisions, and review checklists so boards and code officers can systematically incorporate flood resilience into local laws and development decisions. So as we've discussed a lot during the Lula sessions, we see that local zoning to permit and not permit certain activities is a great tool to use to help build flood resilient spaces. And this could be laid out separately by county, but the important thing is that it's all in one place so that people who are trying to, in the planning phase for flood resilience, can get a comprehensive grip of local rules. And then checklists for certain planning authorities and clarification responsibilities across governance or agencies can also help with multi-level cooperation and planning so that we're working synergistically and effectively and not against each other. So in summary, the FRN could provide these resources to improve flood resilience in the Hudson Valley, and we recommend they do this through centralized data, flood-ready starter kits for municipal planning, practical tools and local solutions, and a planning resource library. Do let us know if you agree or disagree with any of these findings or have any other suggestions. I believe Jess mentioned there might be a survey after this, but also during the following Q&A section. And we'd also like to acknowledge the following people for supporting our work: Jess and Emily for providing this project for us, community partners, all the HVFRN members and stakeholders that let us interview them, our faculty advisors, Dr. Monique Segara and Professor Kayla Roberts, as well as GIS and story map support from our Professor Kip McManus and our colleague Paige Woodard. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Love to see those recommendations. I feel like we've been circling around these things for years, but it's so nice to have them concisely laid out, and the fact that they came from our communities, our members, is really great. So yeah, if we have any time for questions, or we do have time for some questions and comments for our Data Hub team, and you can just put those in the chat or raise your hand.
And if you don't have questions, that's okay too. We have questions for you all about how this lands with you, if this reflects your experience, if you have more detail to add, or anything to contribute about how to reflect on some of these recommendations and the roles that FRN might be able to play.
Yeah, and I see we have a question in the chat from Olga. For the team of who would provide FRN with municipal level data. And there's lots of there's lots of types of data that could be, but just curious if the team has any thoughts on that.
You want to take it? I believe there's a lot of data that is already public online. Also, as we've seen from like our previous colleagues' presentation, there's a lot of municipal plans that we can find that might have resources that we can utilize. And I feel like also the members themselves can collaborate with FRN and share resources to help improve, that library of resources.
Can I add to that too? Is that all right? So with the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, we've been doing a lot of work thinking about data and planning through watershed planning and water quality focus, but I think it's very comparable to the kinds of information and data that you'd need for flooding focus. And one of the things we've been working on is a checklist of the kinds of plans that municipalities should locate as you're going through these kinds of planning processes. And so that might also be something we could adapt for a flood context and have that be available in this resource library that we've developed to say that municipalities may want to have all of this on hand, even if they don't, have it publicly posted. There might be information sharing considerations, but that consistent list of the kinds of data that would be uniquely collected or held at the municipal level sounds like it would be valuable. And we'd love your feedback on that too.
Great, thank you, Emily. And we have a question from Ingrid. Did you find examples of data or resource hubs from other areas that you felt were successful? For example, the Long Island has a resilience hub that could be a good model, but did you find any from other areas of the country or the world? I know you did some initial research into that.
Well, yes, we did some initial research into that, but we started focusing on Hudson Valley more because all those resources were definitely tailored to that region, and that is what we found that we need to put in the grunt work here and figure out what can be tailored to the Hudson Valley, like Long Island tailored it to themselves, and we found many tools in Germany and Netherlands that were tailored. So we did take inspiration from these tools and how they're working to kind of figure out what kind of pointers we need to provide you guys for a tool for the Hudson Valley.
Yes, I also wanted to add that we did find like different case studies in New York State, and but also in a county level. We also had different case studies by vulnerability assessments in the Dutchess County, City of Kingston with the waste water treatment plant resilience, and there was another one with Rensselaer and Westchester. So it was a little bit from moving local, state, national, and one that Jatin mentioned, like from Germany and the Netherlands, that it was not only from our research, but also provided from the interviews.
Great, thank you. And I should say that the students, as part of this work, both groups provide us with a briefing report that kind of digs into more of those details. And a question from Mary, is there staff capacity to be able to set up appointments with different communities to guide them with steps and resources? And I think that's a question that's about maybe FRN staff capacity. I'm assuming, but I think the answer is not at this time necessarily, but maybe that could be a future goal of the network once we get some of these toolkits and resource libraries underway. I think that's a great idea.
And I'll add that in my group, the regional partner interviews were all with folks that provide support to municipalities through planning, but often ends at the planning level. I'm looking to the students and not necessarily with some of that implementation. And so I think that that'll be important follow-up for us at the Flood Resilience Network to reconnect with some of the other regional partners that provide a lot of support to see where we might be able to collaborate or maybe have FRN take on some next steps after the municipalities go through a planning process with another set of partners. So I think this is an area that we can continue the conversations and see what kinds of resources we can pull together.
All right. Well, thanks so much for these questions. And thanks so much to the students. Emily, what do you think? Should we keep it open a little longer or?
Yeah, any other lingering questions or comments or feedback or insights that anyone wants to share? Yeah, Monique, go ahead. Monique, feel free to type it in the chat. Great. So the question from Monique is, what have we learned from this experience? Um, and so I guess I'll ask each of the student teams to start, and then Jess and I can reflect on that.
I'd love to kind of start off the EP team here. I think something that we really learned that we weren't fully expecting was kind of how siloed a lot of municipalities are working in, even if they're in the same county. As we discussed, there's kind of this isolation that can occur when in the planning process. So to see municipalities in which you'd think would be very, very connected, having their own plans and their own visions that are totally in different directions, and just in terms of like how the stages that they're in and various elements, that really surprised that was something that I learned that was surprising.
Yeah, so and if you could add anything that surprised you in this process too, that answers the next question as well. So that's perfect. Thanks, Max.
I think for me, at least, it's very easy to like be in academia and learn all about like these planning frameworks and different kinds of tools and the theory behind engaging the public and coming up with these plans. But how it happens in reality could be a lot more different, and being able to pivot like with a group like FRN and some of the partners that we interviewed is really important. So
I think it's also worth noting, like when we were starting this project, we knew before we began that community, that moving from planning to implementation was like a problem. And I think something that we've studied like in class is about community capacity and how important it is to build community capacity and how that can really enhance like your ability to fight like climate resilience. But it was really cool to kind of knowing that knowledge based on like what we had read in class, and knowing that we assumed that we would find kind of gaps in moving from implementation to planning. But then kind of looking at the municipalities in the Hudson River Valley specifically, and like Piermont especially, who has kind of went out of their way to ground this community capacity in this neighbor-to-neighbor response system, you can really see in these areas like enhancing community capacity is like the key to moving to implementation faster. And that really, that was really powerful, because I think that often we think that moving from planning to implementation, requires like financing and capacity. But I think what we learned here is that it can be simpler than that, and it can really just start with coming together as a community and thinking about what your emergency time like on the ground would look like. And so I think it was empowering to, or was impactful to kind of know what we thought we might find, and then to like kind of really see that in fruition was really meaningful.
I think for us, the CSP team, it was very interesting because from our interviews, we did not only work like in different counties and municipalities, but everyone we interviewed was from different sectors. So we had like planners, we also had in a part community members, and it was very interesting to see not only the gaps, but how those gaps intertwine within municipalities' engagement with communities and with different stakeholders engagement. So I think that was something that I learned a lot, but also like surprised me the most, because like we were getting all stuff of input from different type of people. And then when we all were able to meet, it was like, oh, the same, maybe the same member from another county told me the same thing, but then the same position in another county was really good on planning, but needed help in, I don't know, with grant writing. So that was very interesting to see how everything interconnects at the same time.
I thought it was interesting to learn about the layers for planning and how we went to Lalula and learned about it starts with the zoning, and then you got to go and update your plans. Um, and then I feel like what surprised me was like how the CSP mentioned in their presentation, which is how scattered all the information is, even though there's usually like one dedicated person, but somehow the information is still just everywhere. Um, and what else? Yeah.
So I'll jump in too and reflect a little bit. And we mentioned this, but each of the groups of the students got to attend the Land Use Leadership Alliance on day one and day two and talk to more communities and see how planning really works at the local level in New York State as a home rule state. And so really glad to be able to provide some of those interconnections and additional training opportunities for the students. I learned a lot about planning frameworks that are out there because we knew that how many great projects were going on in the region, but hadn't really taken a close look at the differences and similarities between some of these different planning frameworks and sort of have a sense of where the Flood Resilience Network members are and what that baseline is like right now, where we want to get to. And so just having a better understanding, we were learning together about some of those different pieces and also really refining that 4P model over the course of working with the students, I think is going to be, there's a lot of learnings there. And then also we'll be sharing that back with the network so that you all can provide more feedback and use that as well. And I think that the Flood Resilience Network is really uniquely centering municipal needs and the very unique roles that municipalities play in moving all of this work forward. And the people who know what the best way to do this is you all who are working right on the ground in your municipalities in all these different capacities. And so we talk about limited capacity as well. The Flood Resilience Network has two extremely part-time staff people that together adds up to less than a half-time person, just as a for context. And so it's been invaluable for us to expand our capacity through collaborations like these, where the students can talk with the members. We learn so much from you all. We're learning really together in this space, and it's been exciting to have the fresh perspective of the students of what we might be able to tweak or things we might not have thought of or new angles for different opportunities. So it's been a really rewarding experience for the Flood Resilience Network.
Absolutely. I'll echo that sentiment of just how great it was to leverage these students. And I think something I learned with my group is, I can be very in the weeds with all the different data, but I really appreciated the way that they kind of recommended these different buckets that I think are a little more outside the box and taking a step back that could really benefit municipalities. So I'm just grateful for that framing and excited to move it forward, hopefully.
So with that, we will close today's Lunch and Learn session. Thank you again for everyone for joining us. Thank you again to the whole BARD team and your amazing work and a lot of work over the course of the past few months and this semester as you're nearing the end of this year, this academic year. So just a reminder that we will be back in the Zoom room on Thursday, June 11th for our workshop on building trust with tribal leaders in the Climate Migration Network. We will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of this presentation and the links of the grant opportunities that are open right now for more information. If you landed here and you're not receiving emails from Jess directly on the FRN email list, you're going to want to fill out the form on our FRN website so that you can get contacted directly. And we're just really looking forward to continuing this work and implementing recommendations and continuing to be guided by all of your feedback. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.